right here, right now, this is the jab that I want to kind of throw out there at you. Okay. 5 to 10%. This is the percent of entrants, attendance of at least one AA meeting who stay sober for 1 year. Okay. So if you've been to an AA meeting, like you see new people come in all the time, and they say it's their first meeting and you never see them again. So I'm guessing that's accounting for a lot of the people, right? So 5 to 10% of entrants. An entrant is a person who comes. They just show up. That's it. Now you could come every day, right? But it moves into something called a participant if you come and start to engage. An entrant is somebody who just shows up and they leave. And we've probably all seen those people. Maybe you've tried to chase them out after a meeting or in the middle of a meeting when they leave before the prayer. Maybe you've met some of those people. Maybe you have been one of those people at a certain time. Okay, now this was a comment I got. It says, "Where are you getting these statistics in an anonymous program with no data?" This is from a person who's an amazing long-term recovery person, by the way, watchdogging, some guy on the internet, me talking. I was making a video about the results of AA and how we can improve. And I had all these statistics, but I didn't cite them in the video. And she goes, "Where are you getting these statistics? It's an anonymous program with no data." So you know what, y'all? Like all these things, I took that as a note. Thank you, long timers. Boom. See the bottom of this here? Right there? That is a peer-reviewed study. Peer-reviewed studies, peer-reviewed research, that is the highest standard of scientific credibility. Okay? It's peer-reviewed. So not only do they produce some kind of study, but then their peers like critique the study. Okay? Like so you're putting it out there to be critiqued. All right. So this is now as you see here, right here, these are the guys that made this study happen. Okay. So it is 5 to 10%. This is verified as best as we can guess. Okay. And it's consistent across that 13-year period from 1995 to 2008. Okay. So I don't know what the numbers are now because there is not something more current than this. This is the latest numbers that I have. Okay. Now this is interesting. 15% in a study of 12-step versus non-12-step participants, 15% stayed sober at 12 months using other forms of treatment. So this is the highest number. This is from cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Anybody ever done CBT? Slash motivational interviewing, finding out what drives a person, which is kind of like coaching, you could say. So that is the second most effective method of recovery from an addiction. And it's about 15%. Okay, that's 15% stayed sober at 12 months, at a year. That's like that's the first standard that we're talking about is how do you get a year sober? 15% are getting it through CBT and motivational interviewing. So things other than AA, of course they work. The 12-step fellowship is still the most successful method, and that's what we're going to look at here. In a study of AA, a 12-step fellowship, okay, 22% of participants stayed sober at 12 months. So at a year, 22% of the people who came into AA got sober and stayed sober for a year. And a participant is if they were engaged, they were regular in attendance, they were they sometimes they had a sponsor and they were actively going to meetings and doing pouring coffee, chairing meetings, things like that. Okay, that seems to match up with where my experience is too. There was another study a couple years before that was 20%. So 22% is pretty consistent across the board. Those are the people who come in and start to play the game. Okay. That for most of us in long-term recovery, that was us. That's how we did it. Now, this is the interesting number. In the same study of AA participants, 40%, double, who became sponsors in their first 12 months stayed sober at 12 months. What? So much for doing the steps, slowbriety, okay, over the course of 3 years or 18 months or whatever, right? So again, I'm all for slowbriety. I did the slowbriety way, but I almost died and drank a bunch of times as well, okay? So if we're talking about how do we help people who are new, if you are new, if you're looking at this, what does this mean if you're new? I got to become a sponsor. Well, how the hell do I do that? Well, I got to learn the steps and start teaching it. So do not let anybody get in your way. If you want to be in the numbers, peer-reviewed studies here, if you want to be one of the winners, it doubles your chances. That blows my mind. Okay. So when I saw this, it was like, it verified everything that I've been experimenting with over the last couple years, which I'll get to here. Okay, so this is something that this is going way back in time. Notice way up at the top there, it says August 1946. The Minneapolis record indicates that 75% are successful in AA. And this was based on, this large group study. It wasn't a scientific peer-reviewed study, but it was an AA study in early AA in 1945 in Minneapolis, and they were reporting they were keeping track of these people. But sometimes a guy wouldn't come back to a meeting, so they wouldn't really know if he was still sober or not. But what they said is 75% of these people were staying sober long term. Okay, and so obviously at 3 months it was lower, and then it goes. The more consistent they are, the more time in sobriety they get, the more time they're gonna get. Is the idea. So the overall percentage, it says in 1943 was 78%. 1944 was 83%. Okay, so that's early AA. And guess what was happening in early AA? Well, they were doing the steps quickly. They were doing the steps quickly. Okay, now this is the gold standard. And then we're going to be done with the stats. Okay. This is where we're at. This is the honest assessment of where we're at in the recovery movement. Okay, whether you're just new to the movement or whether you're a longtime person, the recovery movement, 85% of those who reach 5 years sober never relapse again. This is multiple long-term studies, peer-reviewed studies. 85% of those who reached 5 years sober never relapse again. What they said was sobriety became their dominant personality, a sober personality versus their using or drunk personality, right? Because your personality changes when you do this work, just, in certain ways. It gets moved around. And so when your personality changes enough over 5 years, when you're consistent, that becomes the new baseline. And even if you relapse later, even if you have a drink at 5, 10, 20 years, you're more likely to come back and reestablish sobriety so that becomes the dominant frame for your life. That's how the frame is how you view life, as I view it soberly. I want to be sober. So this is the gold standard. So how do we get to 5 years and help 85% of people get this thing? Well, the first step is helping them get a year. How do I get a year? Well, how do I get a year? I got to become a sponsor. How do I become a sponsor? Well, I got to learn the steps. And even if you're a person who's against all this kind of stuff, you know that this is going to help. It's still the number one modality. It's the number one method to get sobriety. That's established specifically with alcohol in the research, by the way, because alcohol has been studied for a very long time now, 50 or 60 years. They have like these huge studies with thousands and thousands of people over, their entire lifetimes now. The drug research is happening now. Okay, they're starting to get into more long-term longitudinal studies, which start to establish a real baseline. We still don't know exactly, the best methods yet, but we know that 12-step fellowships are, as far as we know, that they're one of the most stable ways to get it. We just don't know if it's the best yet because we're still doing research. Fentanyl is relatively recent. Just remember, like 2015, when I came in, I had never heard of fentanyl. I came in 2016. Okay. And I was out there. I would have liked some fentanyl. Okay. All right. So this is, again, this is one of the pamphlets. So how do you do the steps quickly? This is how they were doing it in the 1940s. This is some of the source material from the book Back to Basics, which changed my sobriety. It changed my sponsorship. And what these guys are saying, it was found in Washington, D.C. in 1944, but this is also called the Detroit pamphlet. If you go to silkworth.net, it has all of this research and all the materials from AA in the early days. It's an amazing resource. It's got 4 steps. It got 9-step. Anything you want. Yeah, silkworth.net is amazing. So you can find, there's a big archive there. And this is one of the things. This is called the Detroit pamphlet, even though it says Washington, D.C. on it. And what they say inside, right inside the front cover on page 1, I believe, it says, so that all 12 steps may be covered in a minimum amount of time, they are divided into 4 classifications. And 1 evening each week will be devoted to the 4 subdivisions. So 4 subdivisions, 4 weeks. You're going to do the 12 steps in 4 subdivisions. You're going to do the 12 steps in 4 weeks. Okay, that's what they were doing. So what we've done is we've just moved them all into one day. And then instead of 4 hours, we're condensing it. We're going to spend 4 hours today, but we're going to really focus on the 12 steps for this first part of it. Okay. So that is what these people were saying. This is early on. This is what was successful in the 1940s in some major cities. And they all had these higher success rates where people were staying long-term sober because they were doing the steps right away as an orientation. So there were basically 3 meetings in most major metropolitan areas in the early 1940s as this movement was spreading. Imagine yourself